Right, okay, so oh, lots of people here. Right, I am going to drop into the boards a Miro link for you to all sort of like head over to Miro. There'll be an exercise bit to do in a bit, but I'll do share screen in a minute and show you what we're going to do, and then we'll go there later. And we'll just check by the time we get there that everyone's still got the link and that's all fine. Generally speaking, if you want to do intro, since there's been various sessions today already where people have introed, let's just do kind of, if you want to drop intro stuff in the chat, do that, because otherwise we will lose the first 10 minutes. But anyway, onwards. Right, okay, so I'm going to share screen. Right, can everybody see Miro? Yes, there's nodding and thumbs up and everything. That's brilliant. So essentially, this session is called, rightly or wrongly, it's just the name of it, is Mapping the Territory, the Visual Fields of Economics and Design. So eventually what I want to get us to do is this exercise over here, which I'll just point to, which is just thinking about, so you've got economics and you've got design and you've got micro and you've got macro. And there are models on all these axes and various different things. And the reason I'm interested in that is that I did economics at university and did obviously lots of micro and macro models there. And I've fallen in eventually to kind of some design work as I go. And I'm interested in how micro focused it is and how few macro models there might be and whether that's a change. Anyway, we'll get to that later. So this will be sort of like, as we're going through this talk, just have a think and sort of like in those two dimensions of economics design, micro, macro, about what we might look at, what we might talk about, and so on. So basically, an introduction to the inquiry. So I run Smithery, which is a strategic design unit, which is about lots of things. But the sort of like one of the things at the heart of it, oh, we've got someone waiting to come in, so I'll admit to that person. One of the things at the heart of it is this idea of information is light, not liquid, which I started working on last year. And just in terms of sort of, so that even just in the language that we use, when you start talking about ideas, information, data in using the terms of light, the fog is lifting, foresight, line of sight, facing facts, speculation, it changes the way you're thinking about information rather than we're drowning in data. How do we improve the workflow here? Suddenly there's a stream of consciousness that's sort of like, how do we start channeling these thoughts? And I'm interested in leaning more into the light aspect of information than I am the liquid. And so there's various kind of like tools and things that I was working on so as part of this general inquiry. But I made this slide as part of it and just saying, so the thing that relates innovation, design, futures is that they are all visual fields. That when you take this metaphor of information as light, not liquid, actually we're pushing into, yes, they are. I mean, that's the kind of like, that's the literal, the visual field chart from the early 30s, I think it is. That's literally showing sort of like you've got that area of focus, but then you have peripheral vision and so on. And perhaps they all sit on there as well. But I just wondered, for the point of this talk and exercise that we'll do in a bit, is economics a visual field too? So just that very discipline of modeling things in a visual way and showing people your assumptions and putting it in front of yourself, is that sort of like, is that an important connection point to an in particular design, given the nature of the unconference? So that's why I started thinking about models in terms of sort of like visualizing assumptions, visualizing what we're trying to do at micro and a macro scale. Okay, so unpicking the basic practice. That's Stirling University, which is lovely. If anybody ever wants to go back to another university and do another degree, go to Stirling because it's beautiful. I went and ripped the kind of like the definition of what the undergrad economics course is. Economics is the study of how people interact with others and their surroundings, which is good because that's the way that I've been explaining what economics is since I left. So it's kind of like, it must, at the very least, it taught me to read the thing that's on the door for the course when you pick it in the first place. But it's just, I didn't go there wanting to do economics, so I went there wanting to do English and write and tell stories and whatever else. That's another story. But this idea of just sort of like, it's just the study of people. It's and at different scales. So in microeconomics, it's small groups, and in macroeconomics, it's large groups. And there's just sort of like, you're just thinking constantly, these different scales of sort of like, how do individuals and small groups and people sort of like react to each other and things that are happening? How do large groups react or proactively do things that change the things that are going? And then I reckon if you asked most people to draw you an economic model, if they could, would they draw you a microeconomic one? So I think most people would probably draw supply and demand, just because if they've ever sort of like come across the subject before, this is the sort of thing, oh yeah, there's a supply curve and a demand curve, and that's kind of like all I know or what I remember and so on. The one I would draw, because it's the one I remember, is the Edgeworth-Bowley box, which does have different names. But it's just and the reason I draw that is because it's almost like it's the thing that unlocked economics for me as a student, where I went, this is preposterously brilliant. In that, what you assume there's a market in which there's only two people and two products. That's ridiculous. Why would you ever do that? But it's suddenly realized, all right, this is all a thinking exercise. This is all sort of like just going within the bounds of these assumptions and so on. You can draw things which haven't got numbers on them, but they do have some sort of like vague relation to the kind of like the charts and diagrams that you might have got in physics or chemistry or so on. So, but they're sort of like, it's a different way of using drawing to, perhaps going back to the English thing, to tell stories. And of course, you've got macro economic sort of like models too. You get demand pull, inflation, Phillips curve, etc., etc., etc. But these models are designed, and they are pieces of design in their own right. Just that quote there, sort of like, and I've been doing lots of sort of like searching around for sort of like economics and design and kind of like models and various. So these things are designed. They're designed for you to think about things. They're designed as a kind of like a tool for thinking, a prop. They're designed as a way to explain things to others and then maybe to make decisions at things. But they are pieces of design. But they have, I think, more rules and rigor around them than perhaps sort of like what counts as design conceptual models might have. And this is the nice thing about Miro, so I'm just going to rattle through this so we get to the exercise as quickly as possible. We might go different ways. Something I found today, so in between going to the talks today, I've also been sort of like adding some last minute things. But I put the Phillips curve up there and then remembered about sort of like sometimes there's literally a model. So you've got Bill Phillips' Moniac machine. We're just going to say, there you go. Here is the pneumatic water representation of the British economy, which was only ever a model as a teaching tool. But then I read on the internet today they made about 14 different models which were used by central banks for literally trying to model out the economy and the decisions. So no, it's literally just a model. It's just a teaching tool. Oh, but it works pretty well. I mean, that's kind of like all sorts of bad news. Anyway, and sometimes there isn't even a model. So I think, funnily enough, I think I copied that book off either Kate or Indy, The Assumptions Economists Make. And there's lots of interesting sort of perspectives on models in there. But the one that kind of like grabbed me most was the fact that the invisible hand is only a metaphor. It's not even a model. Like no one's been able to model it. You just can't. It's just this kind of like sticky story, this metaphor that persists. Trickle down economics is barely a model. It's like Laffer curve, maybe that's a thing. But sort of like when you start applying more kind of like clear statistics and modeling to it, sort of like, no, this just falls apart. Or even sometimes it's just a story. So I can't remember how I came across this, but there's a little paper there from 2011, which just says, okay, so economics is not rule-based, it's case-based. It's more like law. These are just examples. These are just analogies. These are just like things to compare the thing that you're looking at to. So I quite like that thinking as well. But the sort of, but if you go back up to the models, the sort of like, we'll skip that bit. But the models, sort of like, let's just think about those clear two-dimensional models things. Where does that live in design land, I thought? Just sort of like, where do you have sort of like a similar kind of practice and behavior and so on? And so Horky was talking about this on Twitter beginning of the month, and just talking about conceptual models. So I sort of like, I burrowed into that a little bit more, and I thought, okay, so where in design are these conceptual models? And found that sort of like, so the Dubberly site has lots of kind of like, oh, look, here's all the conceptual models of design which are used. So whether it's the analysis synthesis bridge, map design research, model communication from Shannon, middle out design, and so on. So there's lots of these conceptual models which are more kind of economics in terms of not as kind of like clearly as design. So there is that kind of level above. But it did make me think that sort of like, oh, okay. And so there's some good guides there as well. So Dan, took some notes from the course that he'd done of Shelley Evanson's back in the day, and sort of like, and that's still hanging about on the internet. So it's just describing what you would model and why and so on. But having read all that, I was thinking, oh, hang on, are all the microeconomists designers? So all the macroeconomists go off and do macroeconomics things, and they all sort of like go and do big sort of like big maths equations and whatever else and so on. And microeconomists are basically designers, because design get roped in with behavioral economics, and it all became but sort of like how individuals react. No, really, how do they react? What happens? And so I thought Alistair's talk this morning, when you got into the double diamond stuff, was, again, it's about the micro. It's about sort of like the focusing on the individual interactions. It's about sort of like doing something for one particular client. And there's lots of places around where things like the double diamond fall down. There's sort of like, so there was this guy called Dan Nestler wrote this post and going, oh no, look, I've improved the double diamond, but by really specifically focusing on all these different bits of it. And then he wrote a post, like, and everyone gave him pelters for it. And then he wrote a post about, okay, so I got this wrong, and yes, here's why I've got it wrong, and here's what I was trying to do, and so whatever else. But the thing exists, the thing persists in the world. So I've seen teams pick that up and try and use this, and then worry about why they've not got the opportunities bit in time, because they were using it as a time-based system. They were using it sort of like, oh, we're not here in time, or whatever else. So they've done the wrong thing, because I don't know. I just have a feeling that things wrong in the first place. But sort of like, but even in the way it's taught, it's never said to people, this should be super abstract, or if anything. So all models are wrong, but some are harmful. Blah blah blah. Back up to here. So and then there's various stuff around sort of like the macroeconomic stuff about sort of like the mass and the computation bug kicking in, where you go sort of like, okay, so at some point, macroeconomics stops being about this and it starts being more about complex equations. And then, of course, it starts being about, you go, well, given the amount of computational power we can put behind these things, maybe we can turn this into a simulation that will actually tell us what's going on and what's going to happen and so on, which falls down in a little bit in the same way that architecture falls down. So there's the point in David Ross Shear's The Death of Drawing talks about sort of like the difference between a representation and a simulation. So a sketch in architecture is a representation. It's something to just get you understanding what you might be talking about and having the conversation to go, okay, so we could do this and we could do that. Whereas BIM, building information modeling, is simulation. And so it's about, oh no, you've got this many people and this many sort of, and this much electricity and this many cars and whatever else. So therefore the simulation hangs together like this. This is how it will work. But if you disbelieve one bit of the simulation, then the whole thing breaks. And the same to macroeconomics to some extent. You go sort of like, if a bit of this breaks, the whole thing falls apart. So sort of like representation perhaps is better than simulation in this case. So basically I was thinking, from all of that running around the web and just like putting things together, and then just looking back at my own practice, I zoomed out a bit much there, and just thinking about, so some of the models I used to think with are a bit more macro than they are micro. So this one, for instance, is basically called assemblage space, and it takes, if anybody knows the futures cone, it takes the future cone, and actually speaking to Alice's talk from this morning, it thinks backwards as well. So as well as the probable, the plausible, and the possible, and even the preposterous stuff moving forwards and thinking about those things, it asks you about the tangible, the intangible, the remembered, and the forgotten stuff from the past. All right, so you're thinking about that direct reflection over here and going, okay, this idea that you've got out here. So if you, let's put a thing on there. So if I said that, if I put one node down there as part of a kind of like a probable future that I foresee sort of like coming in whichever industry you're working in, so on, well, that's fine, but you haven't just made that up. You've got that from some information back here. Oh, don't do that. So what has happened that's tangible in the past that you have filtered into something that's probable in the future? And equally, what is stuff that sort of like you could go back and remember things, or look at the things that have been forgotten that could also feature in different sorts of futures as well. But this is sort of like it's talking at kind of like more macro scales than as a bit kind of like the individual micro things. That's the kind of like the general form of inquiries. That's all. Does design have more large scale macro models that we could put on that chart? Does it need more? What's the relationship between these things? Yeah, that's 16 minutes of introduction to a thing, and then we'll sort of like, we're just going to all put things on there, and then and then ask questions and then realize this was a silly idea in the first place. Any questions or complaints? Is this anything like what we talked about, Simon? Is this the thing we talked about in the first place?
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's perfect. I mean, this is exactly what I was hoping for as well. And I think the issue with all of these is that there's just so much there, and just like, you know, even just to kind of pick out on certain things. I mean, I'm really interested in obviously the assemblage space stuff in its own right, and I think that linking to the past and all that kind of way of thinking through to future stuff. But you're right, that question around microeconomists, designers, I think is really interesting. I have been, like, you know, in the kind of thinking about this whole unconference, this idea of macro design, I think is really fascinating and what it means. And I've just started thinking through what some of the things I've seen are that might fit into that, but I'm interested to explore that more. So yeah, definitely.
Well, I'm going to suggest that we spend till 25 past just putting post-it notes on that thing, or drawing connections, or copying and pasting models from the internet that you know, and then we'll just start kind of like navigating around it together.
That sounds good.
All right. Now I think as well, I can maybe play some music while we do that.
Careful.
Yeah, I know, right? Is that working? Can you hear that?
Hear it.
Yeah. All right. So, right, till 25 past, the Miro board, I'll paste the link back in for new arrivers. And that, yeah, just add some things to the board. There could be questions, could be other models, could be whatever you like.
Just let Moling in. I just wonder if you want to just recap on what we're doing.
Hi, Moling. On the Miro boards, which I'll put a link back on the bottom since you just arrived. You'll see there's a 4-box with economics, design, micro, and macro. And so we're just having a look around that board. I've put a couple of examples down first, and people are going to put other examples in. Observations, questions about what design can take from, learn from economics in terms of micro and macro, and vice versa. So if you have any additional things to add to that board, please do. Or if you want to sort of like draw connections across it, then do that too. Okay, almost there. Okay, right then. Wow, that's. I mean, if this is a quarter as good as how it looks, then we have done well. Who wants to tell us about a thing you've put somewhere and why? No one. Shall I volunteer someone? Oh, Indy's going. Yep,
Yeah.
go.
So my little sticky note is probably actually belongs in an economics and design conference, design and economics conference. But DGSE is an example. It's only partly a model in economics. It's actually something that shapes how things are done. So it's actually a design, even though it's a model.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. Yeah, and there's a little bit of Goodhart's law in that, of kind of sort of like, as soon as you design something to explain something and try and use it again, it changes how the system works.
Oh, absolutely. But also a lot of economics thinks it's science when it's actually engineering or design. Like they're building markets, not discovering them.
There was an interesting quote in the assumptions economists make, talking about, often economists say that sort of like it's more like physics or chemistry, but how many physics or chemistry people think, no, this is economics? Answer, no one. Excellent. How should we do this? If you put your hand.
Oh, sorry.
One, Simon.
Yeah, no, I was just I added something into the top left there, which was basically just a curve of diminishing marginal utility. This one regarding ice cream, because I always think it's quite a funny one. This idea of diminishing marginal utility when you have an economy that's kind of geared towards kind of wealth generation, and at the heart of it is a well-known bit of kind of utility theory around the fact that more money doesn't make you happier, and in fact, if it goes anything like the ice cream curve, it's going to end up making you a lot less happy. So I always think that sort of utility theory in this is always quite interesting.
Nice. Joanna is busily sort of like moving things around and utterly prolific, as we may expect. And Joanna, give us a quick guided tour.
Oh, I just had to move everything around because I had micro and macro mixed up by accident. Sorry, but I'm putting all the images in the wrong quarter. So
that sounds like my whole degree.
I put some images from a paper I wrote where I had a whole stash of images. So I put them up on your axis. I put a few more by Kate Rayworth. I think people will be familiar with those. Probably expanded on your one donut one. The other two are these two, the traditional sort of economic model, and then just a more simplified one, which I wanted to put right in the middle, because she's very sort of designerly in her. Although she's not a designer, she talks a lot about how design could contribute to this sort of expanded economic vision that she has. So I thought that it would be kind of nice to theorize that as sort of in between economics and design. And then I put some other ones of like the feminist economic iceberg, and then the double circles, the sphere of production and the sphere of consumption, which is a model based on Elk, who's an ecological economist at Leeds, and then the one up here, this one with the blue is infographic based on Herm Daly's work, ecological economist. So I put those all in the macroeconomics section.
That's great. It's sort of like that. I think it's sort of like your intuition there about sort of like Kate Rayworth's work is, and similarly, so like when I first put the first examples on there, I had it go, well, this is macroeconomics. I'm like, yeah, but it's the most designerly macroeconomics thing I've ever seen. And funnily enough, I've been talking to a client about taking that model and just getting them to run all of the different lines against it and go sort of like, rather than each brand sort of like thinking, oh, we should have one purpose, you know, like every brand should understand their impact across the whole donut. So it becomes a macroeconomic tool, but it's also a design tool. It also changes all of the different things that they do across all these different spheres. Sort of, I think this conference rightly is becoming the Kate Rayworth Memorial Conference. Not memorial, but you know what I mean. It's the sort of like, all talk so far, and rightly, I think. So that I think that's populating the kind of like macroeconomic stuff brilliantly, because it's sort of like, it's obviously filling the kind of like the gaps in my knowledge from the last 20 years of having run away from doing economics. I went to the Bank of England Open Day, the graduate Open Day, and thought, these are not my people. Let's bury down into the macro design.
Sorry, John, quickly. Just one very quickly is that one of the things which actually got me to start talking about this with Simon back a year and a bit ago was, one, I just finished reading Donut Economics, Kate's book, but also, you know, I have been reading and rereading Joanna's book as well. So it's those two books which basically were the sort of stimulus for me to sit there and go, oh, it would be good if we could have something where we could start talking about this in this connection thing here. So although I haven't added a diagram in there, that's my one single contribution.
Brilliant, thank you. I think so. I mean, the whole conference, I think, is kind of is a fascinating idea, and just sort of bringing those two spheres together, when they are not publicly as close as they might be, or could be, or should be, or need to be. I think it's sort of like, that's brilliant. So tell me about macro design, people.
Can I make a very quick observation on the macro design corner?
Yeah.
Which is that I went off to look for some things for here, and when I came back, they were already there, which just goes to show what a small number of things that I could think of in this sector. You know, the multi-level perspective, the pace layers, the kind of points of intervention from Donella Meadows. That was kind of the first three things I thought of, and when I came back, they were there. So there's quite an interesting small number of things that were initially put into that corner, I thought.
Is there such a thing as a macro designer?
An economist?
No. Policy. Probably talk to the policy design unit. They're the ones who'll be thinking at some macro level.
I think that transition design is moving towards that space. You know, that this idea of the expanded conception of design that works not just on, but as is like, you know, it's the whole movement in design beyond services, beyond as design sort of expands its scope.
Yeah, I think so. I think what's interesting about transition design is just the extended toolkit that it tries to bring into the design process, which is one of the things I think is quite interested in, just expanding way beyond traditional design methods as well.
Sally's point in the chat about micro designer might be a town planner makes me think of two things. So one is some of Dan Hill's work. I mean, I put the city as my home screen kind of thing, between sort of like going out to strategic design beyond service design is part of that. And then also the things like the design research unit, and then latterly maybe some sort of like GDS thing stuff as well.
Just going to add a pattern language there, the
yes.
Christopher Alexander book.
Yeah, and so that is so
Thanks, love.
perhaps a question around that becomes a sort of like where do those sorts of designers have homes when so if you compare, and I know less about this because I don't know much architecture, but the sort of like the fact that sort of all architects used to be kind of like local or regional or national employees in a sense, and so that has been shifted into private practice, and so that suddenly they're doing different things. Are there still homes for macro designers in the same way, and if not, should there be, or can they be?
I don't know, would it be possible for people to put little captions next to the images that they put in? Because I'm really interested in the source of, especially this one, the Donna Meadows one with the little icons. I don't know who contributed that one.
That's a very good idea, because what I'll do is I'll leave this Miro board open as well for, well, in perpetuity or until they come at me for money. No, I think it will just stay open. So if you've put stuff down, because you just sort of like annotate with a little sticky note or a comment box for future reference, that'd be useful. And whoever it was that did the Donella Meadows one, who wants to talk about it?
Yeah, that was me. I just searched for it, really popped up.
That's really lucky. Every time I look for it, I get a really ugly version. So it's quite nice.
Yeah, depends if you use like Ecosia or Google, I guess. I think Ecosia is wanting Donella Meadows bumped up.
I use DuckDuckGo. Maybe that's where I've gone wrong. So I was gonna...
So
That's an even better one.
You've got an even better one.
Yeah.
Well. So we've populated lots of macro. I'm very pleased. What else have we got down here? So we've got pattern language coming up. We've got Donella Meadows one. Where is it? If you looked at this as a collection of stuff, where is this stuff taught? On what sort of course do you get that?
Creative sustainability. That's what I'm studying at Alto.
Can I also say I teach a lot of this stuff on my course. So when I say teach it, we look at it.
We look at it together and ask questions. Go, what?
Exactly.
So it's sort of like so it's in the kind of like it's in a design curriculum generally. Where is it in design application? So if you're a practitioner, where do you sort of like, if you come out of that design education, where do you get to use this stuff versus empathy maps, double diamond, whatever it is on the left-hand side?
Gotta find your way, I think. I don't think there's a set position.
I mean, I've seen that diagram used in a lot of like the transitions design lectures. So where designers are showing how they're going to change a food system, for example, and then they map actions on top of the different levers, sort of make it concrete.
I can honestly say, as a content designer, I don't use any of this stuff at all. You know, I use the Service Design Doing book.
Mm-hmm.
Think About Failure Demand, which is on there straddling design and economics a little bit. But yeah, all of this other stuff is completely new to me in the bottom right quadrant.
What do you think about it?
It's difficult to really see when it's not in context, when you're not thinking about a specific problem. You know, that's when it kind of becomes useful.
Mm-hmm. Indy, you dropped a question into chat about the difference between meta design and macro design.
it just came to mind as you were we were sort of riffing on what might be a macro designer, or who might be a macro designer, and tools and things. So things like a pattern language almost seem to me to be edging towards like the meta of design more than necessarily the macro.
And the sort of and Kashama's put about atomic design in here as well. I know you had some noise in the background, Kashama, before, but if you can turn on, that'd be great. But if not, just type.
Yeah. So I put that in because atomic design is something that for the past few years, 3 or 4 years, has been quite popular. So it's putting in atoms and then molecules and all of that of design. And mainly platforms do use that. So designers at platform companies like Facebook and Google, they do use that. But I think a lot of these models, especially transition design models, platformed economies like Uber and say Deliveroo, I think they should be using them, ideally.
So the sort of so is atomic design like the micro interaction stuff by Dan Taffer? That almost like what are the kind of like the tiny little things that make changes within those systems?
Yeah, I think so, and it's also sort of creating a pattern at each level. Pattern language, I think, if I'm getting that right. It's hard to describe it. Maybe I'll put up a link later.
So here's a thing. That's made me wonder if this might be totally wrong and really disappointing conclusions. We've got 4 minutes left, so I better be careful here. So actually, if you took kind of like atomic design, micro design, service design, macro design, meta design as a kind of as a thing, you've got 5 there. So maybe the sort of like it's not about the sort of like maybe micro and macro are too binary as definitions, and there's lots of kind of like space in between that the economics should be going sort of okay, so it's not just micro and macro. What is atomic economics? Ooh, what is meta economics, and sort of like, and just and almost have the same 5-point scale to run for each, and just sort of like have swap those kind of like different complexities over and go, so what is the economies of, to be a sort of like an atomic economist, and sort of like, what do you go, I concern myself with the last hour, not just the sort of like the interaction over the course of a day or sort of the exchange of goods, etc. So like, what are the economic forces at play in the last hour for something? I don't know.
I think that fits with the whole the meta things that Indy was talking about as well. Definitely, this idea of just nested layers of things. I mean, that's what pattern language is about. Is about how a doorknob fits in a door, which fits in a building, which fits in a village. And again with the Donella Meadows, it's like the scale of this small scale, and it's different, but it's kind of a linking thing, isn't it, between those sort of maybe 5 or however many levels you want to talk about.
So that's or maybe I'll just share something quickly again. So on that paste layers, because paste layers is in there, obviously right there. So that the other model I've got up the top there, which is not just the assemblage space stuff, is called Zenko mapping, but that's based on running Stuart Brand's paste layers from How Buildings Learn versus paste layers from Clock of the Long Now. So basically, this is the people axis, this is social interaction. So if you imagine this is kind of like the fastest sort of like fashion stuff here from the original Brand thing all the way to kind of like culture, probably not nature, but culture down here, the work of all people. And then you sort of like, you run it against the stuff on a table in How Buildings Learn all the way up to kind of like the site, the structure, the city at large and so on. And it's just a way of kind of going to and from around the layers. And so actually the sort of like, it might be something that you could map and sort of like, so if you are concerned, so you take off those axes, but go sort of like, if you are talking about tiny interactions of just one person, then what might that look like? Or maybe it's like and also based on the same axis, there's another thing based in here. called the obliquoscope. Blah, 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 blah. Is it going to zoom in? No, it's too small. Maybe I'll talk about that another day in this sort of random unconference thing that you've done. Is that an end? No, that can't be the end. Any final thoughts? Jerry's final thought. Or Joanna's final thought, surely.
Sorry.
I have one.
Go on.
Sorry. So I think the issue, especially with platform economies and gig economy, is often that what's happening at the micro level is pretty well defined and it's not a problem. What the effect is at the macro, or when the S curve, when everybody's on there, it can be pretty devastating to, say, the labor market and all sorts of things. So I think there should be something about that. And also there's such a dynamic change each time there's a big group that comes in. Yeah, I think the design community should think about these.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, completely agree. So what was my initial kind of like inquiry question as well? Are there things that the design can learn from economics and economics can learn from design in terms of modeling? Yes, but maybe it's just all messy and it's all connected anyway, and it's just about how you look at it. Everything is connected. I'm not going to end it. No, I clearly am. I'm going to end on sort of like everything is connected. Bloody hell. Go on, sorry, wasted.
No. That's not the last point. Yeah, yes, it is. It still needs exploring, which is the point. Right?
Yeah.
And by joining these things up, then that's what you get.
Can you turn on the downloads for the Miro board? Yes, if I know how. How do I do that? Sharing settings, permissions. Who can copy?
Sorry.
I have a comment. I really like this idea of what designers and economists can learn from each other. Although I think it's like, I don't think most economists think they have anything to learn from designers, because they assume that they're doing some kind of science.
It's implicit in the name. Economists assume that they know it all.
Yeah, and designers have more of this idea of knowledge as the sort of generative process that comes from the ways in which we engage with, well, not all knowledge. Obviously, there's different types of knowledge out there, but certainly within the context of this sort of space where it's like oh God, I don't know if I can say this figure. Anyway, I just think that that's a really rich topic for exploration during this conference. Is like, how can the design community try to build more capacity around that, to like really demonstrate how we could contribute, because I feel like that's Kate Rayworth's sort of call to the design community. Like she talks about design so much in her book. Like, she talks about drawing constantly, and she's a real, and she's not a designer, and yet it's such a big theme in her book. So, and I feel like we haven't really responded well enough, like considering considering the need for a response. So, potentially we could, potentially we can figure that out a little bit more over the next few days.
So that's, I really like that point. I think it's so true. And to Sharon's point, yes, to Mariana Mazzucato as well, that's the same. as some of it can come back to sort of like the definition of, well, what is design anyway? And the sort of like, you suddenly go, oh, but everything's design with a small d, and you go, yes, but that becomes like everything is digital, and it's not just, as Russell says, it's not a useful thing to say that everything is design or everything's digital. It's just kind of like, well, what do I do with that? But to the end of, so some of the models on that board that you've all put together are going sort of like, if there are more applicable ways for designers not just to see them but to use them, the stuff that's taught in, so to Dan's point about this is service design doing and so on, you're going, all right, that's just low level micro atomic design, etc. That's not good enough. If you're a designer, you need the book that's doing the kind of like the practical toolkit for using some of these things when you get to clients, when you get to work for government bodies, when you get to work for local planning departments, when you get to sort of like, how do you apply these models, not just, and Alistair from this morning will back this up, not just the bloody double diamond, thank you. How do you apply some of these things in order to kind of like, to Joanna's point, to rise to Kate and Mariana's and others' challenge? I mean, that's a much better ending than just everything is connected. Let's stop there.
Well, sorry, Andrew, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, yes, go. Sorry, hands up.
Just yeah, some last points, because yeah, I have background in economics myself and went into this design course, creative sustainability, and you know, economics is not just about these models. That's just new classical economics, or like new classic, that are based on these. And I'm also doing rethinking economics in Finland, and I think the organization could also work more in terms with design. So maybe put that on some more. I think it's an interesting topic, and definitely something designers are hungry for, I think, because it's very easy to get kind of dominated by this economic language and the values that are implicit in the economic theories that are used by the institutions. So I think, yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be explored more.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I was just a couple of things quickly. So, I mean, just the idea of if we start reducing everything's design, I'm sure the response will be everything's economics as well. From that point of view, the other thing was William Davis, in the introduction to his book Economic Science Fictions, there was just a paragraph in there which is like, where was the design school for economies? You know, what the Bauhaus for economic design, which I found as an interesting provocation, and I think that sort of speaks to some of the ideas that we talk about. Not that I'm suggesting that we need a new European school of economic design set up there, but
next project.
Well, I would suggest maybe not a European school of it, maybe somewhere else, and having to set up a school suggest economic models. But anyway.
Yeah, design got Bauhaus, we got Bill Phillips' bloody water machine.
I'm not sure how to raise my hand. Sorry.
Oh, Sharon, then
hi.
Let's talk.
How do I do that? Raise my hand.
If there's a little button called reactions down the bottom.
Oh, okay.
And then within that, there's a raise your hand thing.
Okay, I just got a thumbs up or a clap. So
Oh.
I can't see the raise your hand option. There you go. Anyway, we can just have a normal conversation. I just want to say thanks a million, John. I think it was really enjoyable, and I feel like we just scratched the surface of you know, what we could go into in relation to this topic. And I mean, I wonder about, just to pick up on the question of language, I mean, something I'm doing a lot of work on at the moment is around storytelling and framing in relation to new economics. Mm-hmm. And if we think about visual in correspondence maybe with material semiotic, that opens up maybe new and different ways to think beyond, I mean, the static visualization to how we think about designers creating subjectivities and building new ways of living in that capacity. So I think that is a visual and aesthetic dimension again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, So that's my input.
Well, that's really leans into those two language-based things of the invisible hand and trickle-down economics. Neither are models; they're just language. They just give you enough of an idea. So, but they show the kind of like the persistent power of language that doesn't have a model. So, like if you can convey the idea through the design of language, then things can happen.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And actually, in a way, so donut economics it really conveys the shape of the thing. I can never not think about donuts.
Yeah.
But in an all serious point, that's all that you're going. Is donuts the right kind of like model to be thinking of when you're sort of like asking those questions? Yes, it looks like a donut, but is that the most powerful bit of language that could be used for the intent?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know Kate has done a huge amount of work on the terminology and being very careful around not using, terms like degrowth and post-growth because of the, studies around frame theory and when you use a certain word, how it activates a kind of a dominant, the dominant economic imaginary. So, I mean, yes, I think in the language, but also in the aesthetics, and design plays a role there too.
Yeah.
Thanks a million. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. We've run the next session is starting very shortly. So thank you, everyone. And my contact details are on an original Miro board, and I'll leave this one open and stuff.
Could you make it downloadable so you can download the graphs and such?
Yeah, if you email them and tell me how, because I don't know. I'm looking through all the things, but just email me and tell me how, because I'm looking for all the buttons and it's not telling me how. I will do it now.
Cool.
Thanks
a lot, John. Thanks, everybody.
See you in other things.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, John.
Cheers, Dan.
Good.